Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the r/Kollywood Podcast. Today, we are going to be covering another Under the Lens episode. This time, we're not doing one movie. Interestingly, this time we're going to be comparing two similar type of movies. So, in today's episode, we will be talking mostly about Indian 2, and then sort of trying to do a comparison and deep dive in relation to Indian 1 that came out in 1996. So, yeah, in today's episode, I have with me some of my co-hosts, Dart. Hi, Dart.
Hey, Parrot. Pretty happy to be here to be talking about. I mean, at least Indian 1. I mean that it is a cult story that has stayed with us for a very long time, and it is an extension. Unfortunately, not a good one, but I'm pretty curious to see what we're gonna dive into.
Go, Siege. Hello, Siege.
ஹலோ தாத்தா வராரு, கதற விட போறாரு. நம்மள ஹோப்ஃபுல்லி இந்த எபிசோட் கேட்டுட்டு நம்ம ஆடியன்ஸ் கதற மாட்டாங்கன்னு நான் நினைக்கிறேன், நம்புறோம். அதுக்கு நம்ம முயற்சியும் செய்வோம்.
And we also have Mora with us today. Hey, Mora. Happy to have you back. Cool. Okay. So, in today's episode, I think one thing I want to do. So, Indian 2 எல்லாரும் அடிச்சு துவைச்சாச்சு. So, I think what are we going to talk about today? And obviously, on the internet, there have been a lot of speculations and reasons for why Indian 2 didn't work. So, everything starting from Chitra Arvindan / Siddharth's promotion during the movie initially. To Aditi Shankar's dance. So there are probably a number of reasons attributed to why Indian 2 hype didn't match expectations. So we'll talk today a lot about the writing, and I think we'll sequence this episode in this specific way. So we'll try and do comparisons between the two movies on characters, the plot and themes, and then we'll sort of do a world building comparison or a setting comparison, and then we'll sort of conclude there. So, yeah, let's start with comparing characters between Indian 1 and Indian 2. And I'll probably start, maybe the most significant or important character that I think we can compare and talk about is none other than our Indian Tata, Senapati. I'm sorry. Do you guys have any first strong opinions about Senapati between Indian 1 and Indian 2?
For me, the biggest difference between Senapati and Indian 1 and Indian 2 is Indian 1 வந்து Senapati was a man who had a lot of gravitas, right? And he had all these skill sets, Varmakalai and whatnot, but he only started using it because he was pushed into it in some ways. If you look at Indian 2, the Senapati we got is a completely different character. Like, he's actually enjoying killing people. It feels like Senapati moved to Taiwan or whatever, and then he just became senile and just decided to turn into Spider-Man from Spider-Man 3, if that makes sense, right? So superficially it's the same character, but then the way he goes about things and the way he kind of even talks and his body language is very, very different. And I think in some ways, I know they wanted to project Senapati as a superhero, but in doing so, I think Shankar completely missed the point of what made Senapati special in the first place in Indian 1. And ultimately, he was the manifestation of the anger of the common man facing corruption. Whereas in Indian 2, he was just a borderline cartoon character. I know strong words, but that's what I felt when you kind of look at it.
I'll just add to exactly what you're saying, Siege. So yesterday, when I started watching Indian 2 for this podcast, right? The first scene where Senapati is introduced is right after the calendar song on that boat, and it will be like a round cuttle where the bad guy was with the girls, right? And the first time he's talking to the bad guy, he's just lying down on he's lying down on that exact bed, like Senapati is lying down on the bed, கை வந்து தலை பின்னாடி போட்டுக்கிட்டு, like very very the body posture pagrappe, like I was comparing that to Indian 1, where Indian Tata will put like when he's sitting in that, especially in that scene where the officer comes to his house and he's sitting in that easy chair la, அப்புறம் அந்த ஈஸி சேரோட கையை வச்சு he'll hit that guy. So like you compare this and that, just by the body posture you can see how much of pride Senapati had inside him in part 1. In part 2 அந்த ப்ரைடுங்கிற ஒரு விஷயம் almost like just disappeared. Like he, like you said, almost he doesn't know why he's doing this in the first place.
Yeah, so that நீங்க மாதிரி homework கொஞ்சம் பண்ணேன். So I feel like for me at least, Senapati in Indian 1 is somebody who I mean they establish this early on. He's someone who did his part, suffered the consequences during the Indian freedom struggle, then comes back, and then all he wants to do for the remaining rest of his life is to just live a peaceful life with his family and follow and hold on to his own principles. And when that sort of breaks, it sort of like really re-establishes within him, like நம்ம நினைச்சது ஒண்ணு நம்ம இப்போ பார்க்கறது ஒண்ணுன்ற மாதிரி. And so he really realizes that there's a need to sort of restart like a revolution or another freedom struggle for current day India. And so for example, all the different like character motivations throughout, I feel he knows he's doing something wrong, but he feels that it's for a greater cause, which is very exactly paralleling how the Indian freedom struggle under INA was. So everybody knew that they were taking up violence, and they all knew there was a different way of approaching and tackling these things. And so Senapati's character in Indian 1 is very much aware of what he's doing is not correct, but he's doing it so that he makes a point to everybody and instills fear. And that is the core thing in first part, is he even stresses it out multiple times, and he tells everybody, நீங்க எல்லாரும் இந்த கத்தி தூக்கிட்டு வராதீங்க, நான் பண்றது வந்து இங்க இருக்கிறவங்களுக்கு பயம் காட்டுறதுக்கு அப்படின்னு. Part 2 I felt was like a completely different character, not just culturally, like because now Indian Tata acts in a different way, behaves in a different way, the way he's also like taking pleasure, like Seed said, in like basically like torturing these people is also in a very different way. It certainly feels to me like it's a different character, and for some reason I think they recognize that too, like Shankar. And I think that's probably why you don't have all the same supporting people around Senapati in Indian 2. Like you don't have Amritam in part 2, because how can you have a character like Amritam in part 2 with when you're kind of juxtaposing Tata as like a completely like more modernized person using a cell phone, taking like selfies, and I think Indian 2 la இன்னொரு ஒரு கான்ட்ரடிக்ஷன் என்னன்னா, like they even say it during the film la, they'll say இவ்ளோ நாளாச்சு இப்போ இன்னும் தாத்தா உயிரோட இருப்பாங்கன்னு நினைக்கிறேன். So there is even that sort of very bizarre thing, but I think when I try to compare, I don't think there's even a baseline to say this is the same Senapati character we saw in Indian 1 and in Indian 2. And I feel that's very conscious. And also tone of the film is very different. Like first film feels very much like a thriller murder type of genre, with like all the different elements, of course, like in a Shankar film where there's romance, there's comedy and all that. But Indian 2 la, I don't know, it just feels a little bit like a superhero-ish film. Cool. Okay. So Senapati pati pestom. Let's talk about Chitra Aravindan next. Mora?
Actually, சித்தார்த் எடுத்துக்கிட்டோம்னா அது ஒரு பயங்கர ஸ்டைலிஷான ஹீரோ, அண்ட் பயங்கரமா அந்த ரொமான்ஸ் சானல்ல பயங்கரமா ஒர்க் ஆகுது. பட் இந்த மூவில எடுத்துக்கிட்டா அவர் அதுல யூஸ் பண்ணவே இல்லை ஒழுங்கா இந்த ஜானர்ல. ஐ ஃபெல் லைக் ரொம்ப சித்தார்த்த வந்து அனாயிங்கா காட்டின மாதிரியே இருந்துச்சு ஒவ்வொரு சீனும். ஏதோ ஒரு ஸ்லாப்பபிள் கேரக்டர்னு எடுத்துக்கிட்டா எப்படி இருக்கும் அந்த மாதிரி ஒரு ஃபீல் கொடுத்துட்டு இருந்துச்சு.
It didn't help that, right? And the off screenல வந்து அவர் கொடுத்த interviews and the press conference வந்து it also fed into people's minds when they watched the film. So அதிலே வந்து ஒரு perception வந்துடுது எல்லாருக்கும் அந்த மாதிரி, like he's a very annoying person or character or whatever, and that also kind of carried forward into watching the film. அது ஒன்று இருந்தது.
அந்த டைலாக் ரைட்டிங் வந்து ரொம்ப பழசா ஃபீல் ஆச்சு, லைக் ரொம்ப பூமரிஷா ஒரு மாதிரி சூட்டே ஆகல. கிட்ஸ் கேரக்டரா இருந்தாலும் ரொம்ப பழசா ஃபீல் ஆச்சு. இந்த மாதிரி கேரக்டர்லாம் இப்படி பேசுமா அப்படின்னு சொல்லிட்டு. அதுவும் சித்தார்த்த சுத்தி இருந்த அந்த வைப் கிரியேட் பண்ற ஃப்ரெண்ட்ஸ் வைப்பும் சரியில்லை.
ஆமா, இது சேலஞ்ச் என்ன தெரியுமா? I think we saw that with Shankar in both Indian2 and Game Changer, and also with Money in Thug Life, right? They really struggle to, and the genzification பண்ணதுல வந்து they really struggle with it. And the language யூஸ் பண்ணுறதா இருக்கட்டும், அந்த லிங்கோ or just the overall sort of Gen Z vibe, they have a very poor understanding of it, and ரொம்ப ஒரு மாதிரி செயற்கைத்தனமா
I
இருக்கு.
feel,
செயற்கைத்தனம் கூட சொல்ல முடியாது.
I
It's bordering on
feel
like a parody.
we still haven't gotten a movie which does that well, right? Maybe I don't know about Dragon and stuff, but I don't think we have.
Yeah, see, Dragon. See, I by so if you're talking about within a mainstream masala movie, அந்த மாதிரி பாத்தீங்கன்னா இல்ல, I agree, but there are definitely very good Gen Z films. I mean, நீங்க சொன்ன மாதிரி Dragon ஒன்னு இருக்கு. That is a good example. In fact, even a lot of people dislike this film, but as a zeitgeist thing, I would say even this one, Pradeep, the first film, kind of had a more authentic feel to it than whatever we were getting with Indian2 and Thug Life.
Yeah, but sorry to move it away from the topic, but for me, right, Chitra Aravindan is the character who is actually driving the story forward. So basically, first act, why Indians coming back is because of Chitra Aravindan. So he's very plot driven in Indian2. I'm just trying to think parallel பண்ணி பார்க்கறேன். Indian 1 is there somebody who is actually driving the plot outside?
See, I would say, right, Chitra Aravindan வந்து he's the everyman character, right? So he's the sort of audience surrogate for us in this world. The equivalent character, it's not the same purpose, but the equivalent character for us in Indian 1 in some sense is Chandru. But of course, Chandru's arc and the way he's integrated within the context of Senapati's own story is very different and way more personal than how it's done with Chitra Aravindan within the context of Indian2. I'll actually challenge that. நீங்க வந்து நீ சொல்றீங்க சித்தார்த்னால தான் வந்து சித்ரா அரவிந்தனால தான் வந்து சேனாபதி comes backனு. I don't think so. All he does is just start this random hashtag, but it seems like Senapati வந்து is already kind of made a list of people that he wants to knock off, and he's kind of working on that in parallel. The only thing he does is acknowledge Siddharth that he's going to come back, and vandu kuda they don't meet in person for a very long time. They don't meet until towards the end, as far as my memory serves right. So to say that Siddharth is the reason why Indian Tata comes back, I think that's too much of a stretch.
I mean,
he's an important character.
That is how they show in the movie. Like Siddharth is shouting under a bridge, and then he starts a hashtag, and the next scene.
But bro, அது நீங்க பாருங்கள,
if the movie's narration is like that.
இல்ல, but the narration is a very poor narration. I think that is what they wanted to go for, but then it is very evident that Senapati already has Gulshan Grover in his mind, and that's why he's going and chasing him after that calendar song and whatever. So இதுக்கு ரெண்டுத்துமே வந்து சம்பந்தம் இல்லை, I would say. They just have a very tenuous link to it. என்ன கேட்டனா வந்து இல்லை, if Chitra Aravindan had not started this whole hashtag business, that Bobby Simha character would have never come to know that Senapati is involved in some shape or form in all these killings. And he could have just done his thing quietly, and never you could have completely avoided the whole unicycle chase or whatever they had in the end, right?
Indian தாத்தாவோட மினியா அன்னியன் மாதிரி இருந்திருப்பாரு.
ஒரு question எனக்கு I want to ask all of you. Do you think Chitra Aravindan came out to be a poor character because there were 4 exact like mirror people like him? So for example,
possibly.
Priya Bhavan Shankar. Yeah.
And the worst part is he was the most annoying out of the 4. Or at least that's the way they made him out to be, right? Again, I'm not throwing shade on Siddharth as a person, but like it or not, the general perception is that nobody talks about Jagan or Priya Bhavani Shankar. They're so forgettable that you don't even remember them. But the minute you talk about that those set of characters, right? You talk about Chitra Aravindan and how annoying he is.
Yeah, it ended
so
up
there's also a very simple character test kuda.
Cartoonish to me.
Yeah. அந்த ஃப்ரெண்ட் கேங் எடுத்துக்கிட்டோம்னா, லைக் அந்த 4 பேரை பார்த்தோம்னா அவங்க வந்து லைக் ஒரு யூடியூப்ல வீடியோ போடுற மாதிரி ஒரு டீன்ஸ் மாதிரியே ஃபீல் கொடுக்கல. ஏதோ ஒரு 30s வேலை இல்லாம பண்ற மாதிரி இருந்துச்சு. பட் அந்த கேரக்டர்ஸ் வந்து ஒரு டீன்ஸ் பேஸ் பண்ணி இருக்கிற மாதிரி இருந்துச்சு. எனக்கு அப்படி ஃபீல் ஆச்சியா.
இப்போ ஒரு கேரக்டர் டெஸ்ட் கொடுத்தா like so just trying to think, right? இப்போ Indian 1ல இருக்கிற ஒரு ஏதாவது ஒரு கேரக்டர் யோசிப்போம், and let's see if we can describe that character without like sort of an occupation, but just on the basis of the character னு எடுத்துக்கிட்டா. So for example, Manisha Koirala's character, right? Not that significant in Indian 1, but when we think of that film, like the first thing that comes to our mind is like she's someone who likes and cares for animals. She's part of the Blue Cross Society. There are a lot of things that come to our mind that when we think of that character, we immediately associate and attribute in the things.
Very true. Very true.
Chitra Aravindan character is such an important character. Can someone tell me, other than the Barking Dogs YouTube channel, what is the characterization point that we can immediately associate with Chitra Aravindan other than annoying? Like, is there another character trait?
This is a very nice question. I just know him as a son for Samudrakani, but I'm trying to see what does he actually do. Yeah, actually you're right. I don't even know if he's a good friend. I don't know if he's a good boyfriend for Rahul Preet. Like, I don't have the answers for any of these questions.
Like, Rahul Preetoda scenes unnecessary feel ஆச்சு. அந்த ஒரு romantic song வேற கட் பண்ணிருந்தாங்கல. Yeah.
Okay, Pirate, yeah. I think I give up. I actually don't know.
So I feel for me, this is one of the core things. Like, anytime you think of like each of these characters, and Chandru Kusona, we can say a couple of things as well. So I think some scenes Indian 1 lala, it feels like it's a 3 or 5 minute film. It feels like they've spent a lot of time on scenes, but advantage enna, all those scenes inform the character in some way, I feel. So அந்த படத்துல வர ஒவ்வொரு பர்சனுக்கும் ஏதாவது ஒரு attribute சொல்ல முடியும். Like for example, if you take even I forget Urmila's character. So I can think off the top of my head, like she likes asking for A jokes. She likes making fun of the other characters in the film and things like that. So I'm trying to think of Indian 2. And Indian 2, I think major problem is everything feels so like fast-paced cut off that there isn't time given to any of these characters. And Chitra Aravindan suffers heavily from it because you expect more from it because he's introduced as this very important person from whose point of view all of the film takes.
You're right. See, I'm pretty glad that there was no romantic angle between Chitra Aravindan and Priya Bhamani Shankar. But even without that, like, you're right. Like, everything feels very abstract, and we pretty much have no idea who they are. Just as for
see, it comes down to what Chitra Aravindan was supposed to be, right? I think he was supposed to see. Okay, let's take a step back. I think if you go back to interviews of Kamal from 2018, 2019, right? There's a Baddy interview where he talks about why he was doing Indian 2 in the first place, right? And I think it's a very critical element that probably informed this film, but the execution was all over the place. He said something very specific. He said that I'm doing Indian 2 keeping my political career in mind, right? And if you think about Kamal or a party or his own slogan, what is his slogan, right? With which he fought elections. Ungalil naro, ungal naro, something like that, right? One among you and one of you. Mm-hmm. Chitra Aravindan Vande, if you take that sentiment one step further, right, I think he was supposed to represent a Senapati in every common person, which would have tied in well with the political message that Kamal was going for, which was the primary motivation for him to do this film in the first place. And Neenga Sonna Mari that is the reason why he appears as an abstract idea rather than a full-fledged, well-rounded character. Now, that does not mean it's a justification for poor character development, and it's just that it didn't work. They just kept him as an abstract idea.
I think, like Pirate is saying, I think that it is not just Chitra Aravindan in this movie, right? Even Senapati, outside of what we already know of him from Indian 1, there are no character traits which come out in this movie. They're just performing their roles.
Yeah, and speaking of, so one more point to just stick to this. Idhu or question na unga ellarkum. So given how the twist at the end comes through for Chitra Aravindan's character, in terms of finding out his father is actually corrupt, even though he works in this anti-corruption office, do you guys feel like maybe most of this film, if they had cut out all the other three friends, let's say the film was just Chitra Aravindan, he has a YouTube channel. He's running it somehow. ஒரு கஷ்டப்பட்டு இந்த மாதிரியான திங்ஸ் எல்லாம் ட்ராக் பண்ணி இஸ் கோயிங் தேர் டூயிங் ஆல் திஸ் பட் அட் த சேம் டைம் தே ஆல்சோ ஷோ சீன்ஸ் தட் எஸ்டாப்ளிஷ் லைக் ரிலேஷன்ஷிப் வித் ஹிஸ் ஃபாதர் மதர் and then the twist at the end comes. Do you guys feel that that would have been a bit more impactful? Because when we saw all of that happen, it just felt weird, la?
For sure, we'll feel a little more for the characters in the movie, right? Right now, almost all of us in the movie do not really like the Siddharth character as much. So when he is actually losing something and he's doing all the go back Indian stuff, we are already lost. Like in Vivek's words, irundittu po avladhaan, like we are done.
And to me, it felt very much like a replication of Ambi's character from Onion, in the sense that he's expecting everyone else to follow these rules. But I think one thing most people forget is Ambi behaves that way because of like such a traumatic past of his sister.
Yeah.
So that is what sort of drives that character. So every day, Ambi or a character experiences that same thing that happened to his sister over and over with different people, not caring, not following the rules, all that. But Chitra Aravindanla, I wish they had also kind of established why he's such an anti-corruption crusader. Aside from the fact that, of course, his father is an officer who's part of that sort of anti-corruption vigilance commission.
Okay. I think I think it's a good segue to our next section where we talk about the thematic elements in this film. But just kicking it off in some ways, right? Ultimately, there was one very, very interesting and potentially very powerful idea in Indian 2, which was, I think Siddharth's character, it was like Neenga sonna madri, he is like Ambi who expects everybody to be a rules Ramanujan madri. But then he takes it to such an extreme, it results in an indirect loss of a loved one. So, oru vidathila there was, you had, in some sense, vigilantism. And while admittedly what Chitra Aravindan does is not vigilantism in the conventional sense, Senapati is the one who's doing the actual killings, but it's still not based on existing protocols of justice. It's based on moving a bit beyond that, right? அதோட ரெப்பர்கஷன்ஸ் காமிக்கிறது I thought that was a very interesting idea. It probably was the only thing where you have a germ of a sort of moral dilemma whether vigilantism or going the extra mile is valid or not, right? Whereas in Indian one it's very cut and right. You're frustrated with corruption, let's go kill people. I mean, that's and the anger that manifested in Senapati, and that is what was the mood of the time back in 95 or 96 when this film came out, right? That was just the general sentiment. I mean, having seen the film when it came out, I can tell you that people are like, that's literally what people used to say, right? But in 2025, there's a lot more nuance to it. And I think Shankar was probably onto something. It's just that he probably is too old and too held back in his own mind space to develop something sensible out of it, or at least make a point about it. Let's put it that way, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you. One maybe reply to it is, I also feel like he's sort of caught between trying to do like a boys style film versus a vigilante style film. Because in the Patla, they try to show that these kids are still kids at the end of the day. So even though they do all these really good things, நீங்க பாத்தீங்கன்னா ஒரு 2-3 சீன்ல after the barking dogs video they record, they do such a very impactful ஒரு segment, especially the girl Sunita who dies, right, by suicide. Then they record that whole video. Think about it this way: they make sort of like a mockumentary style satire of the person, and they do all that, and then they record it, and then they publish it on their YouTube channel, and then immediately they're all sitting down and watching the views go up, and then they're all like so happy. It's this thing where like usually vigilante style films the at least Shankar odukla, the characters are very idealistic. They're doing it for that particular reason. There is no other secondary motivation,
and there's a gravitas.
Exactly.
There's a certain gravitas, and they're very serious people.
Yeah, exactly. If it was like Ambi had that entire day, and then instead of coming home and like crying and taking a bath, instead if he goes on computer and posts everything on Facebook, that would sort of be like an equivalent of this. Like
Yeah.
that sort of tonal change shift was also definitely like an issue for me, at least with some of the characters and how it was set up.
Yeah, and probably the casting didn't help, right? Like if you're gonna show people act a bit silly and a bit immature, right? Getting people in their 30s and 40s to pretend that they're in
Yeah.
their 20s is not going to be very believable. Let's be very honest.
Yeah.
And trust me, I'm very jealous of Siddharth's routine or whatever that he does, that he looks very very young for his age. அந்த ஸ்கின் routine நமக்கு சொல்லுங்க பாஸ், நம்மளும் கொஞ்சம் அந்த மாதிரி யூத்தா இருக்கலாம். பட் ஐம் சாரி, யூ டோன்ட் லுக் லைக் a 20-year-old.
Actually, I think the characters from Neek could have worked better out here.
Dude, you stole the
You are
words from my
right.
mouth, man. They would have
Yeah.
been perfect. Well, not perfect because they're acting pretty. It sucked big time in Neek as well. But yeah, I think on the age group the casting it would have worked probably. In fact, the
Yeah.
lead from Neek, Matthew Thomas, done and that would have
Yeah.
I think, or I forget, or Pavia or some, I forget his name. He could have been a good Chitta Ravindan, frankly.
Exactly.
Could have been a pretty decent Chitta Ravindan, yeah. And you could have put that Priya Prakash Warrior as that Priya Bhavani Shankar character. That would have been quite okay. Acting wise, also they were probably the better ones in the film. So
Yeah. So I mean, to people who are listening, I mean, tell us the youngest character in Tamil cinema recently, or even Malayalam, where the protagonist who is pretty young, let's say Gen Z, and he's fighting with a cause, and the movie kind of built it up really well for us.
I can think of one. MG Rajave.
அவர் வந்து
He fight for
எவ்ரி
a
வீக்
cause.
ஒரு புது காசு எடுக்கிறாருல்ல. எவ்ரி வீக் ஒரு புது காசு வருது அவருக்கு.
Sorry, Dad. நீங்க ரொம்ப passionate-ஆ பேசிட்டு
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I would be curious because Avesham is something I can see where the kids were portrayed with like why they are doing what they are doing, but I can't really think of somebody else.
காசுன்னு சொல்ல மாட்டேன், but at least they had some purpose. I would say the guys from Alapura Gymkhana probably. But again, அது ரொம்ப personal cause தான் அது ஒரு விதத்துல.
You're right.
But அதுல வந்து they still have a bigger thing, right? They want to win medals for their district and whatever towards the back of the film. So அது ஒன்று இருக்கு. But of course, vigilantism.
Let's talk about the plot and the themes. So ரெண்டுமா சேர்த்து பேசலாம். So what do you guys think?
Thematically, it is very obvious there are a lot of commonalities, right? And the key thing is, once again, in Indian2, Shankar, and you can also pretty much confirm what I'm saying based on his interviews, right? He wanted to once again manifest the anger that the common man faces vis-a-vis corruption, and then use a character to manifest that anger, right? And அது ஒன்று இருக்கு. But again, and probably this is jumping a bit ahead, I think why it does not resonate so well even thematically is one, like it or not, corruption is not as such a big issue in 2025 India as what it used to be. Not in terms of the effect that it has. It still has the exact same effect. What I mean by that is people have 20 other problems that they want to focus on than corruption, because they've accepted it as a part and parcel of just living in India. அது ஒன்று இருக்கு. You can't change that. அது தப்போ ரைட்டுன்னு அதை பற்றி நான் வரலனா, but it is a reality. So அதிலே வந்து thematically you kind of lose out on some gravitas with Indian2. Secondly, the core plot, like in Indian1, the first half of the film is essentially a cat and mouse game between Nedumudi Venu's character and Senapati. Like Senapati is doing all these killings with Varmakala and how he kind of tracks it. In parallel, you have Chandru's arc, who's supposed to represent the exact antithesis of Senapati. And then it kind of converges with Senapati's journey towards the end, where Senapati has to make a very big decision, even at the cost of personal sacrifice. In Indian2, I still don't know what the core plot is. To me, it's just two random things. And again, I kind of get what they were going for, right? Because Indian1 kuda or parallel rendu kada porudhu, but it converges in the end. But the convergence is based on something personal for the lead character, which is Senapati and Chandru. இங்கே எப்படி என்ன ஆகுதுன்னா, you have two arcs, right? One is Senapati going and killing all these people for XYZ reasons. Simultaneously, Chitra Aravindan and the Barking Dogs gang they are trying to weed out corruption. There is a repercussion to their actions motivated by Senapati. which results in the convergence in the end. But because there is no tangible relationship between these two characters or arcs to begin with, that convergence one day just feels random and tacked on, and just feels like we just watched the first half of a longer film, which probably it was in the first place, right? Considering it was meant to be one film, which then got divided into two.
ஸோ நான் இப்போ இதை இன்னொரு மாதிரி கேட்குறேன். ஓகே ஐ மேக் அன் அப்சர்வேஷன் அண்ட் தென் ஐ வாண்ட் சி வாட் யூ கைஸ் திங்க். ஸோ டு மீ ஐ தாட் themes வந்து they were almost very similar themes. So for example, Indian 1 I think everyone thinks Indian 1 is about like the corruption and of that, like, but for me the soul of the film is between a father and a son. Senapathi's characters or a true test enna, because he started this anti-corruption crusade, can he kill his son who is now in the middle of this or not? And then the character ultimately overcomes that and does kill his son, and that proves that he was able to stick to his moral code throughout. In the padatliyo I feel like there is a father and son, but that father and son is sort of hidden and it hasn't been explored that much, but it's basically the father and son relationship between Siddharth and Samudrakani, right? So there is something there. I feel like that has not been explored. And then the second aspect of that related to it is family versus country. So Indian 1லயும் நாடு பெருசா வீடு பெருசான்ற அந்த ஒரு இது இருக்கும், and that drives the first theme of the film as well. So in the movie Siddharth and all these kids making a choice against their family is for the sake of the country, but there is that clash that they are not able to reconcile with, like Indian Tata was able to in Indian 1, right? What do you guys think about that? Or are there other sort of themes you think Indian 2 does try? I'm curious to hear what you think.
I think when you're talking about that was a very good point, like brought up the father versus son and father versus country. Both of them, like both the movies are driven by that, honestly. Right. But in the padathla enna like even though Chandru and Senapati did not get a lot of screen time together, whatever we got was more than enough to understand what was the relationship between them and how much of a tussle they have been going through. Like that one song of Pache Kiligal Kootoda, like, is enough to show what is the family dynamics. Like 5 minutes.
And the flashback. And the flashback when his sister dies.
Shankar is a master. Like ellarum solranga avalukku kaasula selavu pandறாரு, but he is a master of storytelling through music videos. He has been doing that very well for a very long time, consistently.
Exactly.
It is just now he's not able to recreate the same thing right now, unfortunately. But so the original Indian had stuff like that going pretty strong. And out here, Samudrakanikum, Siddharthakum, there were multiple scenes, but we didn't really care about what is going to happen to their relationship. I mean, in the first place, I don't really care what's going to happen to Chitra Ravindra. Why would I care about what is going to happen in this relationship? Pretty much the same thing for the next one, like family versus country. Like out there in the original Indian, you're actually feeling something for the family. You're feeling something when the dad is killing the, like, I'm sure like all of you, we were all like kind of shocked. Like, how can a dad kill a son? Even though we all knew Chandru was not lawfully a good character, he was still like a likable person to the audience. For all of us, we still cared about Chandru. We didn't want him to die. We wanted
Chandru.
Yeah.
But Chandru, yes, he's not a very morally upright person, but again, he's not a bad person to begin with. He's pushed into a corner and has to make that choice. And the big difference in Chandru he's not wanting. He thinks that and the brake license or whatever that he needs to do for that car, he expects the guy to go do it properly. He doesn't believe that it is going to cause anything wrong. And the carelessness arise a situation or impact results in him going one step further and making it into a potentially drunken driving case and pushes him really over the line. But even then, he's doing it to save his skin, and inherently he's not a bad person.
True.
He is
True.
in some sense a victim of circumstances, but at the same time where he goes over the line is where he kind of absolves himself of any
Exactly.
responsibility.
I agree with that.
Right.
So what I was trying to say was, like, when he was getting killed, we felt something because we knew he
You
was
feel
not.
bad,
We knew he
exactly.
was not a bad person.
You
You
do.
know.
Yeah.
But in the
I
Padathila,
think
when
which is why Senapathiல
when
கூட
things are
வந்து
happening to the characters which have traveled with us for the last 2 hours, we really don't feel anything.
see
Yeah.
even that's why see Senapati வந்து when he
I
kills
think
Chandru
சங்கர் வந்து
even
with
சொல்லுங்க மோரா sorry
with சந்துரு கேரக்டர் எடுத்துக்கிட்டோம்னா லைக் அவங்க வந்து ஒரு he would do that அந்த கிட்ஸ் போற ஸ்கூல் பஸ் வந்து he would அதுக்கு தப்பா வந்து லைசன்ஸ் இது கொடுத்து இதாயிரும். ஸோ அந்த சந்துரு கேரக்டர் போய் இவர் போய் கொல்லணுமான்னு ஃபீல் ஆகுற நேரம் அவரு கொல்றதுக்கு போறப்ப வந்து சந்துரு வந்து லைக் அந்த இந்தியன் தாத்தாவை திட்டுவான்ல, அப்ப வந்து நமக்கு வந்து ஃபீல் ஆகும், ஒரு இந்தியன் தாத்தா கிட்ட ஒரு எமோஷனல் ஆஸ்பெக்ட் ஃபீல் ஆகும். ஸோ எனக்கு என்ன தோணுதுன்னா லைக் அவர் வந்து சந்துருவை கொல்றது வந்து கரெக்ட் தான் எனக்கு ஃபீல் ஆகுது, அந்த பிளாட் பாயிண்ட் அப்படி வச்சனால.
Yeah, very valid.
the other thing right
That scene was very impactful in Indian 1.
and Senapati வந்து இல்ல when he kills Chandru, I mean yes he has that kind of monologue or whatever before he stabs him, but when he kills Chandru, right, you can see in his eyes the pain that he's going through. And the pain தெரியுது, well, like you know at that I see Kamal being Kamal, you know, aced it, but he is doing something that basically is ending his journey as a father. That's a very very it's a very powerful moment, I feel, right? I think viewers or listeners who have kids, you know, you'll probably know this. I mean, you cannot it takes a very very strong step to give up the idea of being a dad when you have a kid, if that makes sense, right? It is probably the worst thing that can happen to you, and when you have to do it by your own hands, it's not a pain that will eat you from the inside. It'll just destroy you for whatever remaining time in your life you have, even if that action within the context of the film is probably righteous, keeping aside the overall moral ambiguousness of vigilantism. That's a complete different subject. But idilada vande illa, when you go to Indian 2, where you have this person who took such a deep drastic step which should traumatize someone like that, he's suddenly going and killing people wantonly, or not even killing them, he's just using like gimmicky versions of Varmakalai and reveling in their suffering, right? That just makes him no sense. It really feels like நீங்க சொன்னீங்கல்ல, I think Pirate starting there, like Senapati was like a superhero in Indian 2. I think for some reason Shankar wrote him as the Joker more than anyone else, like from Batman. He went so far down that he's now just lost it, and now he's just become a psychopath.
So I think நான் சொல்ல வந்தது என்னன்னா, see உங்க பாயிண்ட்டுக்கு I feel that first partல வர்மக்கலை is purely, so இப்போ ஒரு இந்தியன் தாத்தா வந்து ஒரு வீடியோ கேம் கேரக்டர் மாதிரி எடுத்துக்கலாம் வச்சுக்கோங்க. There are like some physical attributes, there are some special powers, and then there's actually like a weapon. So இந்த மாதிரி ஒரு கான்ஸ்டிடியூஷன் எடுத்துக்கிட்டா, physical attributes, தாத்தா first partலயும் does a lot of things that stretch our incredulity, I feel. But it's there, but it's subdued and it's very realistic, right? Second aspect வந்து வர்மக்கலை is mostly used, நீங்க எல்லா சீனும் திரும்பி பார்த்தா, it's mostly used because whoever is the victim that is going to die will either try to call for somebody, or they will try to basically try to get out of the situation. That is when it's used. It is not used to in a fantasy way to completely distort who that person is or anything like we saw in this film, right? And the main weapon is actually the knife that actually is used for killing all these people, right? So that is what Varmakalai is. Varmakalai is purely for making them, and the movie le solluvanga. And most of these things also in the first movie, what I liked was there is a way to reverse it. In fact, when Nedumani's character goes through that, there will be the same person in Kerala who comes here, and they will sort of reverse everything that happened to him. To some way, that felt a little realistic.
So this was something they dealt in retro with. Like retro, when Surya is like on the man biryani, man curry biryani, on that scene, he'll hit all those guys, and he'll be like 24 hours seriya. But we know what Surya went through before that. We know who he spent time with, where he was learning, and all that. And in Indian too, like Mora was talking about that scene, and the wedding scene. So when he's killing that guy will end up wetting his pants because he's gonna get killed. and Kamala Hassan வந்து at that point he's like, கொலை கூட ஒழுங்கா பண்ண விட மாட்டீங்களாடா, like that, dude, that is not why you are here, you know. See,
Yeah.
he started having fun by just killing people.
One more thematic question I wanted to ask was, what do you guys think about why? So நம்ம corrupt characters எடுத்துக்கலாம், சந்துருவோட கேரக்டரையும் எடுத்துக்கலாம். One thing I feel that Indian 1 they sort of established very well is this sense of self-preservation. Whoever is actually they show as either corrupt or somebody avanga society le, I think we can talk about this more in this next section as well, but I want to just pre-set it up now. I feel Indian 1 and I think Siege brought this point up. Indian 1 we have globalization just entered India. So everyone's starting to become economically self-dependent by themselves. City la irukravanga, they're starting to slowly become middle class people. They are getting into this or specific zone in their life where they want to improve the standard of how they live. And village la irukravanga ella, they are coming to the cities. They are looking for opportunities. They also want to improve their life in or aspect irukku. And Indian 1 why I like the corruption angle is it is sort of represented as an inevitable thing, because for as at the time it's not just the corruption. So நான் எப்படி பார்க்கறேன்னா, it is the system, அந்த சிஸ்டம் வச்சிருக்கிற protocols, அந்த சிஸ்டம் வச்சிருக்கிற process, and இந்த திங்ஸ் எல்லாம் வந்து குறுக்கு வழியில பண்ணாம நேர் வழியில பண்ணணும்னா, all the people who are in a rush to get to this middle class stage, they are not going to be able to. And that is very clearly established in just like or RTO office liye. Everyone wants that license or whatever else they're seeking for in the RTO office. But on the RTO office vanda 3 days agum, 1,000 rupees mela spend pananum. So why do all that when rather in one day I'll just give this 500 rupees and get everything done. So there is an incentive for both the person who's asking the money and for someone who's giving the money. Whereas I think in Indian 2 now, modern day Siege again made this point, we don't see corruption in this particular manner. I feel like most of us or at least some of the families who are in middle class, they've become sort of this urban middle class.
It's the cost of doing business mari aiduthu ipo. That is a big difference illa. That is just the reality. We just treat it as a matter of fact. Yeah. Which,
correct,
morally can be questionable, but then within the grand scheme of things, it's not something that keeps people awake. You know what I mean, right? So nobody cares. I mean, that's just a sad reality. I mean, you can sit on your sort of ethical argument that why should we even do that, but that's not the reality we are facing now, right? And the other thing, let's see, it's also the impact, right? For example, இங்க வந்து ஒரு I'll kind of connect what is there in Indian 1 also to like what happens in today's like world and whatnot, right? Indian 1 வந்து the Manorama character very very critical, right? The impact that corruption can have in the life of an average person. And அங்க வந்து மனோரமாவோட கேரக்டர் வந்து she's literally like a செருப்பு பண்றவங்க தான் நினைக்கிறேன். Or her husband used to do that, right? And then he dies in a riot or something where he was just there for no fault of his, right? And she's been running pillar to post to get a certificate. And இன்னைக்கு வந்து கிடைக்க போறது, and because of whatever reason she doesn't get it, she kills herself or immolates herself. And that is a very powerful scene because you see the price of corruption on the lowest strata of society. நீங்க சொன்ன மாதிரி பாருடி, இப்போ இருக்க சிச்சுவேஷன் வந்து என்ன ஆகும்னா, நத்திங் வில் ஹேப்பன். இன்னைக்கு இருக்கிற வேர்ல்ட வந்து லெட்ஸ் சே யூ ஹேவ் a very similar person in a very similar strata of society, right? Particularly in states like Tamil Nadu, which are relatively prosperous by Indian standards. Even if they're not particularly rich, அவங்க வந்து கடனை வாங்கி ஏதாவது வாங்கிட்டு they will go pay the bribe and get their things sorted out. And அதை வந்து they'll pay that கடன் back. They're not going to sit on this sort of moral high ground that, oh, I am going to immolate myself, or I am going to kind of, probably that's an extreme step, but what I mean is like they're not going to essentially become very emotionally distraught by it. and they're not going to suddenly feel like, oh, corruption has destroyed my life. They're like, okay, fine, this is what I need to do in order to do my things, and that's it. That's the reality, right? And the human price இருக்குல்ல, you don't have that anymore, and that's a sad reality of the Indian society we deal with, but that is the reality we are faced with as well. The other major, very crucial point about how that the timing of Indian 1 and Indian 2 matters, right? The globalization element in 95, 96, post-liberalization India and whatnot. அப்போ வந்து இல்லை 90s there was this narrative. எப்படின்னா கரப்ஷன் நம்ம வந்து எடுத்துட்டாங்கன்னா இந்தியா வந்து ஒரு it'll become a progressive nation. So India, the only reason India is not a developed nation is because of corruption. That was the narrative. In 2025, the narrative is, despite corruption, India is on the pathway to becoming a developed nation. It doesn't really matter. It's just considered as a part and parcel of our life. And that's the reality you're dealing with, which is why, barring a few people here and there, nobody gets worked up over corruption anymore, which is why even if you consider the theme of Indian 2, it doesn't land very well amongst most people, and this is heavily criticized as well by a lot of reviewers and so on.
Okay, that segues us into a nice little place of setting or world building that I wanted to talk about. So I think Indian 1 நிறைய நம்ம இதை கம்பேர் பண்ணி நம்ம பேசணும், in the sense that இப்போ everyone, so நம்ம பார்த்த எல்லா சீன்ஸுமே the lot of like, I think this is where Sujata shines with his dialogues. நம்ம Indian 1 பார்த்தா ஒன்றும் இல்லை, ஸ்டார்டிங் சீனே let's take it, okay, அந்த கரப்ஷன் கார்பரேஷன் ஆஃபீஸர் வந்து ஃபர்ஸ்ட் இந்தியன் தாத்தா போய் உள்ள கொலை பண்ணும்போது, even when he is walking inside, he'll be witness to hearing so many people talking in a very related way about what are some of the things that they've had to do in order to get something done fast and quick. So it's a very interesting angle to explore, because Indian 2 you guys feel that இப்போ இருக்கிற current day setting, and I think we talked about this a little bit just before, what other than social media justice, other than the fact that nowadays if someone's going to ask for corruption or someone's giving corruption, we have instant access to be able to record them, shame them, which I would say arguably in Indian 1 upon the time that was not even a possibility. Like appo the chance of being victimized was like a lot higher. Not saying that isn't possible today, but Indian 2 I feel that Shankar actually tried going in that angle in Indian 2, where there's more ample avenues for people to speak out, to actually get something visible. And idu ellame Indian 2 I think became a more sort of approachable or visible side to everything that happens in today's society. Do you guys feel like that was aptly captured? What are your thoughts there?
What I'm trying to see from what you're saying, I'm just trying to at least take it to the themes of killing people. Since you started with that, like Indian 1 when Kamal Hassan is going to kill the guy in the rice go down, like you said, aduk munadi they are like small build up of we are hearing some stories, and at some extent they're relatable. Okay, like it's not like we are exactly going through it, but we have seen similar scenes in our own life or in the lives of our friends and family. Indian 2 when the same murders are happening, they're happening in a totally upscale, like the first one is in a ship, then like a rich guy in like a gold palace or something, and the third one a space shuttle, I don't know, whatever that thing is
exactly.
See, it is totally it, like there's nothing for us to take from there. Like it is not like when I'm comparing the worlds of Indian 1 is something that we actually live in. And I think in Indian 2 what Senapati expects is அது அப்படி உங்க பக்கத்துல இருக்குன்னா அதை நீங்களே பாத்துக்கோங்க, நான் பெரிய ஆளுங்களை மட்டும் தான் நான் பார்க்க போறேங்கிற மாதிரி ஒரு தீம் எடுத்துட்டு வந்தாங்க. And because of that, Senapati's battle doesn't feel as personal as it felt in Indian 1.
எனக்கு என்ன தெரியுமா, கிட்டத்தட்ட வந்து இல்லை, அல்டிமேட்லி நீங்க இந்த ரிலேட்டபிலிட்டி சொல்றீங்களா, I just extend it in a slightly different way. ஒரு விதத்துல வந்து இல்லை, the problem that you had in the 90s was petty corruption. Like that was the thing that people felt impacted their quality of life, and that was what led to the plot of Indian 1, right?
Yeah,
Indian 2
I
was
just
a
wanna
tiny
put a
thing.
disclaimer that just because you're talking
Yeah.
about this, I know we all still go through all of this, and it's still happening. And
Yeah. We're not.
yeah,
Yeah, we're not trivializing
yeah,
it, but we're also acknowledging that it's not on
families.
people's. It's not the first thing people think of if they had to quantify what is their problem today. That's a fact, right? It does not make it morally or ethically right, but it's a very different beast to what it was in the mid 90s. Having lived through it, I can tell you this, and I think a few of us have lived through that period, right? I distinctly remember it at least. I think ஒரு விதத்துல வந்து இல்ல, the one interesting thing that they wanted to, நீங்க சொன்ன மாதிரி இல்ல, that whole space shuttle or whatever, or even that gold palace that they had, right? If you kind of see what are people angry about in today's time and age, it's this massive wealth slash income inequality, where even the average upper middle class person is really pissed at ostentatious display of wealth. I thought that was a good idea to kind of manifest that anger in a plot like Indian 2's. It's just that the way that was built was so over the top and so unrelatable that it just started appearing cartoonish.
Yeah, I think just to bring this point to a conclusion, one thing I will say is on the whole village Kasturiki and the burn incident,
Yeah.
I think that is like a really good synopsis and thesis for Indian 1, in the sense that, of course, on the series of incidents nadakumla, everything is logical. If suddenly you bring some burn victim to a hospital, who knows what the cause of that is? It could be anything. So obviously, first you do need to take a police report, and you need to go through the process of making sure that, in the particular incident, suicide kadayadu, or wasn't some sort of self-harm, or wasn't some sort of crime, that it was actually an accident into a clarification. No, having that sort of realistic thing where a doctor will say that. But I think where the movie makes a really interesting point is, இதெல்லாம் தான் ப்ராசஸ். இந்த ப்ராசஸ் எல்லாம் ஃபாலோ பண்ணோம்னா 4-5 days ஆகும். 4-5 days வச்சுட்டு you can't treat a really serious and emerging problem, right? Especially when it needs to be handled in 10 minutes, basically, like a sort of as an ICU. So I think that was a very relatable thing. And Kamal's Senapati even asks one of the village administrative officer, என்னால இந்த பணத்தை கொடுக்க முடியும், கொடுக்க முடியாதவங்க இல்லாதவங்க என்ன பண்ணுவாங்கன்ற ஒரு கொஸ்டின் கேட்பாரு. அப்போ அந்த வில்லேஜ் ஆஃபீஸர் will say, இல்லாதவன் இருந்தா என்ன இல்லைன்னா என்ன. And that is a very powerful thing at that particular point, which also Kamal's character realizes, is that in the fast pace la hurry burry la, where everyone wants to take these shortcuts and follow these rules, they'll give the money off, they do all this stuff la. அப்போ இருக்கிறவங்க எப்படியோ சமாளிச்சு they are able to somehow eke their life out. And people who are extremely affordable, sure, they don't even think about these things, Siege, like you said, because it's just part and parcel of their, it's bundled into their day-to-day lives in Ramadri. Illadavanga, we can easily think what would even happen to people. And I think Indian 2 there are all the people I feel from, like Chitra Arvindan's character encounters are some of those people experiencing sort of those sort of issues, but rather than it being procedurally shown why that is an issue, the biggest problem enna, like for example on the teacher situation when she's going and trying to do an interview for, rather than showing us what is the actual process, like where are they taking a shortcut, or are they trying to do the right thing, and the exploration Indian 1 la irundhudu, Indian 2 la illa. So we can very clearly feel that missing in Indian 2, which is what makes the whole thing, ninga starting la sonninga, it feels very superficial, artificial also, because it's just making a statement about this issue rather than showing you the reality of the situation, right?
They also went too big too fast, right? Because ultimately, I don't know, because it's a, they want, I don't know what Shankar was trying to make a bigger film or whatever. He wanted to show 5 different killings in 5 different places and 5 different creative ways, because that's Shankar after, post Onion Shankar, where I think he gets a vicarious pleasure in showing some creative ways of killing people or showing vigilantism, right? So ஆப்வியஸ்லி வென் யூ ஆவரேஜ் ஒரு கில்க்கு வந்து ஒரு 10 மினிட்ஸ் கொடுத்தா கூட அதுலேயே 50 மினிட்ஸ் முடிஞ்சிடும். அந்த 50 மினிட்ஸ் நீங்கள் வந்து அந்த வில்லனையும் இன்ட்ரடியூஸ் பண்ணணும், ஏன் வந்து இந்தியன் தாத்தா இஸ் கில்லிங் தட் அந்த பேக் ஸ்டோரியும் காட்டணும். தெர் இஸ் நோ வே யூ கேன் கைண்ட் ஆஃப் டூ ஜஸ்டிஸ் டு இட், விச் இஸ் வை இட்ஸ் நாட் வெரி கிளியர் whether that person who deserves to be killed in the first place. I mean, you kind of go with the flow because, yeah, okay, they're presented as stereotypically villainish, and na sonna madri they're all very wealthy people, right, who are very unapologetic about it, and therefore, yeah, nammaloda social conditioning அப்படின்னா அவங்க கிட்ட பணம் இருந்து ரொம்ப ஓவரா பந்தா காட்டுறனா it must be a bad person. That is how we are conditioned to think. தப்போ ரைட்டா அது வேற விஷயம், but that's just what it is. Right. And he's hoping, like Shankar is really hoping that makes you understand the righteousness of Indian Tata's thing. Whereas Indian one la vande every kill vande there is a clear justification on why Indian Tata feels the necessity to go and kill him. And I think that is what you sonna mari is very much lacking in Indian 2.
I want to ask all of you, we've seen Indian 1, we've seen Indian 2. What are your guys' expectation for Indian 3 war mode?
I mean, from what they showed us towards the end of Indian 2, it is basically a backstory of how Senapati became Senapati. I have a pretty good image in my head, a good storyline in my head because of watching Indian 1 of what Senapati is. And I honestly don't want them to spoil it, and I hope they don't make it.
Bro, அது வந்து சேனாபதி இல்ல சேனாபதியோட அப்பா இல்ல
நினைக்கிறேன்ல, அதான் நானும்
ஆமா சேனாபதி அப்பா, right?
In 1890s நடக்கிற மாதிரி காட்டுறாங்க.
Yeah, 19th century காமிக்கிற மாதிரி இருந்தது.
So சேனாபதியோட அப்பா.
Yeah, by the time they showed that, I was tapped out of the movie, man. I like
understandable. எல்லாம் திரும்பி because எனக்கு I had the same doubt, but then once I saw Kajal Agarwal and not Suganya, I was like, okay, this is a different.
இல்ல it's his father. I can pretty much guarantee it because in the trailer la vanda he tells Siddharth and gang, right? Like நீங்க தெரியாத ஒரு war hero பத்தி நான் சொல்ல போறேன். So எனக்கு bro expectations வந்து சிவாஜியில் சொன்ன மாதிரி இல்லை, நீங்கள் வந்தால் மட்டும் போதும். எனக்கு பியாண்ட் தட் ஐ ஹாவ் நோ எக்ஸ்பெக்டேஷன்ஸ் ஃப்ரம் Indian 3. I know people were like intrigued by that Veerasekaran flashback. I'm like, why do I care? Like, I mean, basically it's quite evident that has nothing to do with the plot in the present day other than acting as a point of motivation for these guys. Right, that is very evident. Idu na spoiler oda nanu sollala, literally it's there in that trailer, right? That Senapati will kind of talk about this, Chitra and gang will suddenly realize naanga pannadhu romba thappu and they'll get back on track. That is literally what this subplot is gonna be.
So வந்து இந்தியன் தாத்தாவை யாரோ ஒருத்தங்க ராண்டமா கன் எடுத்து ஷூட் பண்ணுவாங்க, அப்படியே நாயகன் எண்டிங் மாதிரி முடிப்பாங்க. சித்ரா அரவிந்தன் கையில வந்து இந்தியன் தாத்தா சாவாரு, அப்படியே இன்ஸ்பைரிங்கா கோட் சொல்லுவாரு.
எனக்கு என்ன தெரியுமா
கதை மாதிரி இருக்கு. இல்ல தாத்தாவோட மேண்டல நம்ம சித்ரா அரவிந்தன் தான் எடுத்துப்பாரு.
இல்ல bro, you know what, like when the first trailer for Indian 2 came out, right, and sorry I'm going to sound a bit pompous when I say this, but let me say it nonetheless. என்னோட தியரி என்ன தெரியுமா, and I'll also give you a reason why I came up with this theory as well. என்னோட theory was that Indian 2 வந்து Senapati does not exist. I mean, yes, Kamal will still be there in the film and Kamal will still appear as Senapati and he will be doing all the stuff that you see in the movie. But my theory was that Siddharth is essentially using a combination of AI and prosthetics, because AI is the new cool thing, in order to carry out his own brand of vigilante justice inspired by Indian Tata. Okay? And the rationale for that, why did I come up with this outrageous theory, was because நான் சொன்ன மாதிரி ஸ்டார்டிங்கில் கமல் wanted to do Indian 2 keeping his political career in his mind, which நான் சொன்ன மாதிரி அவரோட டேக்லைனே வந்து உங்கள் நான் or உங்களில் நான் or whatever, right? So what better message than to say நீங்கள் எல்லாருமே ஒரு இந்தியன் தாத்தா. அதான் அந்த தீம் வச்சு பண்ணாரு. நான் வந்து என்னோட மைண்ட்ல நான் ஒரு தியரி வச்சிருந்தேன்.
நீங்க சொல்ற ஸ்டோரி லைன் எடுத்தா சமுத்திரக்கனி வந்து சித்ரா அரவிந்தன் போட்டு கொடுக்குற மாதிரி இருக்கும், இன்னொரு மினி இந்தியன்.
ஆமா இல்ல பட் நான் என்ன சொன்னேன்னா இந்த படத்தை எடுத்தனா இன்னும் கொஞ்சம் என்டர்டெய்னிங்கா இருந்திருக்கும். I would have frankly
கிளைமேக்ஸ்ல
rather than
வந்து
whatever we
இந்தியன்
got.
கடத்திட்டு போறதுக்கு பதிலா சித்தார்த் வந்து ஒரு பன்னி காஸ்டியூம் வந்து ரிமூவ் பண்ணிட்டு நான் தான் இந்தியன் அப்படின்னு வந்தா நல்லா இருந்திருக்கு.
இல்ல but it would have been a good twist, right? Like
Yeah.
and it kind of ஒரு மாதிரி ரமணா மாதிரி போயிருக்கும் ஒரு விதத்துல, but I think it would have made more sense and you didn't have to go, you didn't have to bend over backwards to justify how on earth is a bloody 105-year-old person taking the crap out of people in their 20s and 30s. இப்போ வந்து படத்துல இல்லாத ஒரு சீனெல்லாம் வந்து யூடியூப்ல ரிலீஸ் பண்ணிட்டு ஜஸ்டிஃபை பண்றாங்க. அவர் வந்து 105 வயசானா கூட வந்து ஏன் பண்றாரு இந்த வர்மக்கலை அண்ட் ஹவு இஸ் சோ ஹெல்தி அண்ட் ஸ்டஃப், ஏன்னா வந்து அவர் வந்து தெய்வ பிறவி ஆர் வாட் எவர், ரைட்? யூ குட் ஹவ் அவாய்டட் ஆல் ஆஃப் திஸ்.
நீங்க சொன்னோனே எனக்கு ஒரு திடீர்னு ஒரு ஃபன்னியான ஒரு திங்.
லெஜெண்டரி டைரக்டர் போய் இவ்வளவு அமெட்டூரிஷா ரைட்டிங் பண்றதுலாம் எனக்கு சொல்றேன்.
I was thinking what
I think
if
குறைக்கணும்னு நினைக்கிறேன். லைக் இல்லைன்னா வந்து லைக் டெக்னிக்கலா கிரிட்டிக்ஸா இருக்கவங்க எல்லாம் எடுக்க விடணும். ஏன்னா ரொம்ப இன்டர்வியூஸ் எடுத்து என்ன வேணாலும் டேரக்டர் சொல்லலாம் மாதிரி போயிட்டு இருக்கு.
சொல்லுங்க பாரு, நீங்க என்ன சொன்னீங்க?
லோகேஷ் கனகராஜ் ஆரம்பிச்சு வச்சது பிளாஷ்பேக்கே சரியில்லைன்னு சொல்லிட்டு அதுல இருந்தே டேரக்டர்ஸ் எல்லாம் ஒரு ரீசனோட வந்துட்டு இருக்காங்க, ஃபேன் தியரிஸ் வச்சுட்டு.
Yeah. I mean, நான் என்ன நினைச்சிட்டு இருந்தேன்னா, Siege, நீங்க you kind of took some words out of my head. I had this exact same thing when I saw the trailer. Because I thought this was going to be like a copycat killer style thing with Siddharth actually doing something similar, right? But now I actually think about it, the timeline would kind of match. Imagine if Chandru and Manisha Koirala had a secret kid and that turned out to be Siddharth. So
எனக்கு இன்னொரு ஐடியாவும் தோணுது. லைக் ரகுலுக்கு வந்து ஸ்கோப்பே இல்ல ஸ்டோரியில. ஸோ ரகுல் வந்து சித்தார்த் தான் இதை பண்றாருன்னு ரகுல் கண்டுபிடிச்சு இதை வெளியே சொல்லியிருந்தா லைக் நல்லா இருந்திருக்கும். அந்த கேரக்டருக்கும் ஒரு வேலிட்னஸ் இருக்கும் ஸ்டோரியில.
Yeah.
I think, Pirate, to your original question, right? I don't think there are zero expectations from Indian 3, but ஒரு alternate Indian 2 யாராவது வந்து AI வச்சு எடுக்க முடியும்னா இது மாதிரி எதை எடுத்து காமிங்க, நாங்க பாக்குறோம், எங்களுக்கு ஒன்றும் இல்லை.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good place to end today's episode. Yeah, I hope everyone who's been listening, we'd love to hear what you thought about Indian 2 and why you think it didn't go as well as it did. Leave us your comments below. We would love to read them. And yeah, we'll catch you soon on another episode of the r/Kollywood Podcast. Signing off from Pirate, Siege, and Mora.
See you guys.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.